Dead America presents The Soldier Day Zero, a multi-part serialized event. And now, please enjoy Part 4. Chapter 1. Several zombies heard his footfalls immediately, their heads snapping toward the sound before letting out bone-chilling moans. The creatures abandoned their aimless wandering and began sprinting in his direction, their movements unnaturally fast and predatory. As he got within 30 yards of the sedan, he reached into his pocket and grabbed the keys, hitting the unlock button without thinking. Much to his horror, the lights on the car flashed twice, and the horn gave a short, sharp honk. The sound cut through the night air like a dinner bell, announcing his location to every zombie within a quarter-mile radius. Just past the car, his eyes caught movement as half a dozen zombies emerged from the darkened area of the adjacent lot. The creatures had been lurking in the shadows between abandoned vehicles, but the car's alarm had drawn them out like moths to a flame. They ran hard towards the vehicle, their arms pumping with determination as they closed the distance with frightening speed. A wave of panic hit Flint as he realized the zombies were closer to the car than he was. "My God," Flint muttered. Flint relied on pure instinct, pumping his legs harder towards the car, adrenaline flooding his system as he pushed his body to its limits. His lungs burned from the exertion, but stopping wasn't an option. As he got within 10 yards of the sedan, half a dozen zombies ran around both the front and back of the vehicle, all of them locked onto him with vacant, hungry eyes. Flint saw a narrow pathway through the middle of them, but it was closing quickly as the zombies converged on his position. Without hesitation, he raised his handgun, pulling the trigger as fast as he could while maintaining his sprint toward the car. There was no time to aim properly, so he sprayed bullets at head level, hoping that volume of fire would compensate for accuracy. The reports from his sidearm echoed through the parking lot, each muzzle flash illuminating the grotesque faces of his pursuers. Much to his relief, one bullet found its mark, striking the ghoul just to the right of center and dropping it instantly. Flint let out a primal yell as he and the zombies converged 5 yards from the car. He lowered his shoulder like a football player breaking through the line, hoping that his momentum and body weight would carry him through the gauntlet. The gap was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but it was his only chance. As he passed through the zombie line, they reached out with grasping hands, desperate to get their claws into fresh meat. Their fingernails scraped against his uniform, some managing to find purchase on the fabric. He felt one zombie's fingertips slipping off his sleeve as he twisted away. However, the creature on the other side managed to get a solid grip. The ghoul's fingers dug into his arm, its grip surprisingly strong for something that should have been dead. Flint yanked his arm hard as he felt the fingers wrapping around him like a vice. He generated just enough force to break free from the creature's grasp. However, the sudden movement broke his momentum and threw him off balance. His stride faltered, and for a terrifying moment he thought he was going to go down. The sergeant stumbled backwards, barely managing to stay on his feet as he fired a couple more times blindly at head level. His shots went wild in his panic, but one lucky bullet put down a nearby creature, buying him a precious second to regain his footing. Flint spun around just before reaching the car, realizing that trying to get to the door would be suicide with zombies closing in from all sides. Instead, he jumped up and landed hard on the hood, the metal surface denting under his weight. As he scrambled back to his feet on the unsteady surface, 3 creatures slammed into the side of the car with enough force to rock the entire vehicle and knock him off balance. The impact sent vibrations through the car's frame, and Flint struggled to maintain his footing on the slippery surface. His boots fought for traction against the painted metal as more zombies arrived. Flint's arm hit the hood of the car as the creatures reached over the side for him, their arms extending upward like desperate swimmers trying to climb out of water. He was close enough to the edge that they were able to wrap their hands around his legs. Rather than continue fighting to get back to his feet, Flint made a tactical decision and dropped to his side. His shoulder dented the hood as he raised his handgun and opened fire at point-blank range. The angle was awkward, but the proximity meant he couldn't miss. In a matter of seconds, he sent the remaining bullets in the magazine flying into zombie skulls. Brain matter and blood splattered onto the pavement as his shots found their targets with devastating effect. The creatures released their grip on his legs as their bodies went limp, dropping away from the car like discarded dolls. He kicked his legs free from the dead weight, scrambling back to his feet just as the next wave of zombies reached the car. Their moans filled the air as they pressed against the vehicle, reaching upward with desperate hunger. As they stretched toward him, he jumped from the hood onto the roof of the car, the metal surface groaning under his weight but holding firm. Flint stood there for a moment, finally out of reach of the zombies that were swarming the vehicle like ants around a dropped piece of candy. He breathed heavily, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath after the intense sprint and fight. The adrenaline was still coursing through his system, making his hands shake slightly as he gave his legs a once-over to make sure they were still in one piece. His uniform was torn in several places where zombie claws had found purchase, but underneath the fabric his skin remained intact. After confirming that he was uninjured, he began talking to himself, a habit that helped him stay focused under stress. "Well, that was fun," Flynn said sarcastically. "Now how in the hell are you getting in the car?" The zombies below continued their attempts to reach him, their arms waving frantically as they pressed against the vehicle. Flint ejected the spent magazine from his handgun, letting it fall to the roof with a metallic clatter before slamming in a fresh one. The familiar weight of a loaded weapon provided some comfort as he contemplated how to get into the getaway vehicle. As he stepped around on the roof, he heard the distinct sound of glass cracking beneath his feet. The noise prompted him to look straight down, and a smirk tugged at his lips as he realized what he was standing on. Charlotte's car had a sunroof, something he hadn't noticed in his desperate sprint to reach the vehicle. "Yeah, that'll work just fine," Flint said. Flint carefully stepped off the sunroof before positioning himself directly above it. He raised his boot and slammed it down forcefully on the glass panel, putting his full weight behind the blow. The first stomp spiderwebbed the glass with cracks, the safety glass holding together but clearly compromised. The next blow completely shattered it, sending fragments cascading into the car's interior. It took another few moments of working on the edges to clear away the remaining glass and open up the hole enough for him to slip through safely. The opening was tight, but manageable for someone of his build. He lowered himself feet first through the sunroof, careful not to cut himself on any remaining glass shards. Once he was situated in the driver's seat, surrounded by scattered pieces of safety glass, he inserted the key and started up the car. The engine turned over immediately, settling into a steady idle as he collected himself and assessed his situation. The zombies outside became visibly enraged at the sound of the engine, not just because of the noise, but because they could now see fresh meat sitting just out of reach behind glass barriers. They pressed their faces against the windows, leaving smears of blood and saliva as they tried desperately to find a way inside. Flint stared at them for a moment, taking the opportunity to study their appearance more closely. Most of them had grievous wounds that should have been fatal, deep gashes, chunks of flesh torn away by other zombies. However, he noticed that a couple of them had no visible injuries, with the only blood on them clearly belonging to their victims rather than themselves. Flint contemplated what that could mean for a moment before forcefully shaking his head, as if he could physically clear the disturbing thoughts from his mind. "Forget about it. Get moving," Flint said firmly. "You're on a clock." Flint shifted the car into drive, pressing gently on the accelerator to inch the vehicle forward. He carefully pushed the couple of zombies at the front away from the car, not wanting to damage the vehicle or create noise that might attract more creatures. Once they were clear of the immediate area, he floored it. The sedan shot forward, quickly picking up speed as he headed back toward the road, The remaining zombies in the parking lot turned to watch him go, their moans fading into the distance as he put space between himself and the supercenter. As he cut the wheel hard to the right, turning south toward his destination, he looked over toward the wrecked SUV where his fellow soldiers had been trapped. He hoped against hope that they had somehow managed to survive, but his heart sank when he saw that the rear hatch of the vehicle was standing wide open. "I'm sorry, boys, I really am," Flint said quietly. Flint shook off the guilt and grief, forcing himself to keep his focus on the road ahead. The mission was what mattered now, and dwelling on losses wouldn't help anyone. He drove several blocks south, maintaining a steady speed while scanning constantly for threats. His vigilance paid off when he spotted movement in an alleyway ahead. He swerved hard to avoid a few zombies that ran out from between buildings, drawn by the sound of his engine. The creatures were fast enough to reach the car, and he could hear their hands smack against the passenger side window as he drove by, leaving bloody handprints on the glass. "Stay focused, man. You don't need to be getting in a wreck out here," Flint muttered. Flint continued driving for several more blocks, navigating the increasingly dangerous streets with growing confidence. However, his progress came to an abrupt halt when he realized he had no idea where he was going. He slammed on the brakes at an intersection, the sudden stop causing his seatbelt to dig into his chest. This being his first time in the city, he was completely lost. The street layout was unfamiliar, and in the chaos of the evening he hadn't paid attention to landmarks or street names during their original approach to the supercenter. He leaned forward over the steering wheel, craning his neck to look up at the street signs mounted on the traffic light overhead. The green metal signs were illuminated by the streetlights, making them clearly readable in the darkness. While there weren't any signs pointing directly toward the casino, he spotted one indicating the direction to the interstate. The white arrow pointed left toward what he hoped would be his salvation. "Well, you know it's on the river, and the interstate is going to go over it," Flint reasoned aloud. Flint let out a long sigh, the weight of his mission settling on his shoulders as he made the turn toward the interstate. He hoped that once he reached the elevated highway, he'd be able to spot the casino's lights and signage from the river crossing. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than driving around aimlessly. Chapter 2. Flint drove through the relatively quiet streets of Shreveport, trying to work his way over to the Riverside Casino while maintaining a vigilant watch for threats. There were a few vehicles on the road, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they moved at high speeds through intersections without stopping for traffic lights or stop signs. The darkness prevented him from getting a good look at the occupants of these vehicles, but based on their reckless speed and erratic driving, it was certain they were very aware of the world falling apart around them. The sergeant pulled up to the stoplight at the entrance to the interstate, bringing the sedan to a complete stop despite the lack of any other traffic to consider. Old habits died hard, even in the apocalypse. He looked up at the bridge above, expecting to see the familiar stream of headlights from cars crossing overhead, but seeing nothing. "Oh, that's not ominous or anything," Flint muttered to himself. Flint made the turn, driving up the curved on-ramp to the interstate. As he approached the top of the ramp, where it merged with the main highway, two zombies emerged from around the concrete barrier that separated the lanes. They had been lurking in the shadows, perhaps drawn by the sound of his engine, and now they were running directly at his vehicle. With no room to maneuver on the elevated single lane and concrete barriers on both sides, he had no choice but to maintain his course and floor the accelerator. The sedan's engine roared as it picked up speed, the speedometer needle climbing rapidly as he gripped the steering wheel tightly and braced for impact. The entire car shuddered violently as the front bumper struck the lead creature. The zombie's body crumpled against the metal and fiberglass before being launched through the air like a grotesque missile. It struck the concrete retaining wall with a wet thud, blood splattering against the gray surface. The second creature wasn't as fortunate in its trajectory. Instead of being thrown clear, it fell straight down in front of the speeding vehicle, getting pulled underneath with a sickening series of thumps and scrapes. The car jolted and bucked as it rolled over the zombie's body, the impact jostling the sergeant around inside the cabin despite his seatbelt. He nearly lost control as the vehicle struggled to cope with the obstacle, the steering wheel fighting against his grip as the tires tried to maintain contact with the road surface. For a terrifying moment, he thought the car might flip or careen into the barrier, but he managed to keep it pointing straight. He immediately checked the rearview mirror, making sure the creature was clear of his vehicle and wouldn't somehow get tangled in the undercarriage. Much to his relief, he could see the mangled form rolling along the asphalt behind him, clearly no longer a threat to anyone. Flint merged onto the main interstate, keeping his speed manageable despite the empty road stretching ahead of him. Multiple buildings along the river were lit up like beacons in the darkness, their lights reflecting off the water's surface in shimmering patterns. After some careful scanning of the shoreline, he spotted the largest structure, with the distinctive Riverside Casino sign shining bright against the night sky. "Now we're talking," Flint said with satisfaction. "Just have to figure out how to get there." As if the universe had heard his request and decided to grant him one small favor. The next road sign that came into view read, "Riverside Casino, next exit," with a helpful arrow pointing to the right. He let out a genuine chuckle at the timing, silently wondering if he shouldn't have asked the cosmos for an underground bunker stocked with supplies instead of simple directions. Flint took the exit ramp, but was forced to bring his vehicle to an abrupt stop halfway down. Two cars sat wrecked in the middle of the road. One of them flipped completely upside down with its wheels still slowly spinning. Shattered glass and twisted metal littered the asphalt around the vehicles. Another car had pulled up beside the wreckage, and 4 zombies surrounded it like predators circling wounded prey. The creatures pressed against the windows, their bloody hands leaving smears on the glass as they searched for a way inside to reach the terrified occupant. The headlights on the trapped car flickered on and off repeatedly in Flint's direction. Someone inside was desperately trying to get his attention, hoping against hope that help had finally arrived. He studied the scene more carefully, noting movement inside the overturned vehicle as well. There were survivors in both cars who needed immediate assistance. He adjusted his viewing angle to get a better look at the flashing car, and his heart sank when he watched the driver turn on the inside dome light. Through the illuminated window, he could see a person making the unmistakable gesture of prayer, hands pressed together and raised toward heaven in a final plea for salvation. "You got a job to do, Sergeant, and you need to do it," Flint told himself firmly. Flint tried to convince himself to keep driving, to prioritize his mission above the lives of strangers. But even as he formed the rational arguments in his mind, he wasn't buying what he was telling himself. With a resigned sigh, he reached into the back seat and grabbed his assault rifle, checking to make sure it was loaded and ready for action. Flint gunned the engine and sped down the remaining portion of the exit ramp before slamming on the brakes just a few yards short of the zombie pack. The sudden stop sent him lurching forward against his seatbelt, but he recovered quickly and popped up through the open sunroof like a heavily armed jack-in-the-box. Taking aim with practiced precision, he opened fire on the creatures surrounding the vehicle. The assault rifle's reports echoed off the surrounding buildings as he sent a controlled burst into each target. The zombies barely had a chance to react to his presence before their heads exploded in sprays of blood and brain matter. As quickly as the assault had begun, it was over. An uneasy quiet settled over the intersection, broken only by the idle hum of his engine and the distant sounds of chaos from other parts of the city. Flint swept his rifle in both directions along the street, scanning for additional threats but seeing no immediate movement in the shadows. A moment later, the door of the car opened with a metallic creak, and a middle-aged man in business attire jumped out onto the debris-strewn asphalt. His face was pale with shock, but his eyes showed the desperate gratitude of someone who had just been pulled back from the brink of death. "Thank you so much," the man called out breathlessly. I'm just trying to help them out." "Do it quick and get out of town," Flint replied curtly. "And go where?" the man asked. "Wherever there's not people," Flint answered grimly. The man paused for a moment, his mind clearly racing as he processed the implications of that advice. "Hey, can I get to the Riverside Casino down this road?" Flint called after him. The man continued working to help the injured people escape from the twisted metal of their vehicle, but he glanced up at the sergeant with a deeply concerned expression. "You don't want to go there," the man warned ominously. "You're absolutely right. I don't want to go there," Flint said with a hint of resignation in his voice. "But I'm not getting anything I want tonight." The man looked more closely at Flint, taking in the details of his bloody military uniform and the professional way he handled his weapons. The pieces clicked together in his mind. This wasn't some random Good Samaritan. This was a soldier on a mission. He nodded with understanding before answering the question. "Yeah, it's about a mile down," the man confirmed, pointing down the street. "You can't miss it." "Appreciate it," Flint replied. "Good luck." "Same to you, soldier," the man responded. Flint slipped back behind the wheel, shifting the car into gear and hitting the accelerator harder than necessary. As he sped down the street, he passed a handful of creatures already running toward the intersection. The zombies were still a good half-mile away from the crash site, and he hoped that the civilian had the good sense to take his advice seriously and evacuate the area as soon as possible. Flint forced himself to focus on the immediate task as the street ahead became illuminated with the bright lights emanating from the casino complex. The building grew larger in his windshield as he approached, its gaudy neon signs and architectural flourishes standing tall in the night sky. As he got within 2 blocks of his destination, however, he had to quickly slow to a complete stop, parking the sedan in the middle of the empty street. What he saw ahead made his blood run cold, and his mission seem impossible. "Jesus Christ, that guy wasn't lying about not wanting to come here," Flint muttered. He could see the main entrance to the casino complex up ahead, and the scene was far worse than anything he had encountered so far. The parking lot was not only completely full of vehicles, but it was also swarming with zombies. Easily 100 creatures roamed between the cars, with most of them congregating around the front doors like moths drawn to a flame. The main entrance itself was barely visible through the mass of undead bodies pressing against the glass doors and windows. Whatever had happened here, it had drawn an enormous crowd of the creatures, creating what amounted to an impenetrable wall of death between him and his objective. "So much for the direct approach," Flint said with resignation. Flint inched his car forward another half-block, hoping to get a better view of the building's layout and find another way in. The closer perspective only revealed more zombies scattered throughout the complex, making the situation appear even more hopeless than his initial assessment. He continued scanning the structure methodically, looking for a side entrance, a loading dock, or even a window he could break through to gain access. The casino was a large, sprawling complex with multiple levels and wings, which meant there had to be other ways inside besides the main entrance. Eventually, his persistence paid off when he spotted a small parking deck attached to the side of the building. Unlike the main lot, this area appeared to have significantly less movement, with only a few zombies visible wandering between the concrete support pillars. "There should be a way in through the parking deck," Flint reasoned aloud. Flint sat in his idling car for a long moment, weighing his options and considering the horrific vision of his fate if there wasn't actually a way inside from the parking structure. With a defeated sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, he pressed the accelerator and began picking up speed toward his target. He knew that if he thought about the plan too much, he might convince himself to abandon it entirely. The noise of his engine immediately attracted the attention of several zombies scattered throughout the main parking lot. They turned toward the sound with predatory interest and began giving chase, their arms pumping as they ran in his direction. Fortunately, he had enough speed and distance that they weren't an immediate threat. Flint cut the steering wheel hard to the right, the tires squealing in protest against the asphalt before finding traction and propelling him toward the entrance of the parking deck. He glanced over his shoulder in the direction of the pursuing zombies, counting nearly a dozen of them in hot pursuit, but still maintaining a comfortable 100-yard lead. Flint accelerated into the structure, not even making it to the first turn when a set of headlights suddenly caught his attention coming from the right side. He turned his head just in time to see another vehicle speeding directly toward him. The last thing he heard before impact was the sound of a horn blaring. Chapter 3. Flint groaned as he struggled to regain his senses, his head spinning from the violent impact. The collision had thrown him forward against his seatbelt before snapping him back into the driver's seat, leaving him dazed and disoriented. He looked up over the steering wheel, temporarily blinded by the one headlight that was still working on the truck that hit him. His vision was blurry, and he could taste blood in his mouth where he'd bitten his tongue during the crash. The smell of radiator fluid and motor oil filled the air, mixing with the acrid scent of burning rubber from where the tires had skidded across the concrete. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply a couple of times to calm himself and clear his head. The technique had served him well during combat situations, helping him regain focus when chaos threatened to overwhelm his senses. His mantra was broken by the sharp sound of a door slamming on the truck. He could just make out a younger-looking man climbing out of the driver's seat, surveying his vehicle with his hands pressed against his head as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The man's truck had suffered significant front-end damage, steam rising from its crumpled hood where it had impacted with the sedan. "You moron," the man shouted. "Look what you did to my truck." Flint wasn't sure if the man was upset at the fact his personal vehicle was totaled or because his one avenue of escape from this nightmare was now destroyed. The man continued yelling at the sergeant as he struggled to open the damaged door of the car. "What the hell is wrong with you, man?" the man demanded. Flint looked over at his accuser, who appeared to be in his early 30s with disheveled brown hair and a thin build. He was dressed in a casino worker's outfit, black slacks and a white button-down shirt. His name tag, slightly askew but still readable, displayed Daniel in bold letters. "Lower your voice, Daniel," Flint said firmly. "Why should I?" Daniel asked, his tone still aggressive and loud. Before Flint could answer, the unmistakable sound of moaning and rapid footsteps filled the air, echoing off the concrete walls of the parking structure. The sergeant turned towards the entrance of the parking deck, spotting the front edge of a mass of zombies streaming through the opening. The creatures had been drawn by the noise of the crash and Daniel's shouting, and now they were pouring into the confined space like water through a broken dam. Their vacant eyes reflected the headlight beam as they moved with terrifying purpose toward the source of the commotion. Flint didn't hesitate, drawing his handgun in one smooth motion and opening fire. He pumped out half a magazine's worth of bullets in a matter of seconds, and despite his head still swimming from the accident, his aim was true. Within seconds, the first 4 creatures fell to the ground, their bodies crumpling as bullets found their marks. The sergeant quickly reached back into the damaged vehicle and grabbed his assault rifle before moving over to Daniel, who was staring at the bodies in complete shock. "You shot them," Daniel stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You shot them." Flint picked up the pace as more moans and footsteps could be heard from just beyond the entrance, growing louder by the second. He grabbed Daniel by the arm, physically dragging him along toward the first aisle of parked cars on the deck. "Move," Flint hissed. The 2 of them vanished into the shadows between the vehicles just before the next wave of zombies came into view. Flint kept his hand firmly over Daniel's mouth, making sure he understood the need for absolute silence as they crouched behind a pickup truck. Flint carefully peeked around the corner of their cover, watching as the zombies converged around the wreckage like scavengers drawn to carrion. Much to his relief, the creatures seemed more interested in investigating the crash site than pursuing them into the depths of the parking structure. The zombies milled about the damaged vehicles, some pressing their faces against the windows while others wandered in seemingly random patterns. Their behavior suggested they were drawn more by sound and movement than by any ability to track scent or follow a trail. He turned back to Daniel, motioning for him to move deeper into the aisle between the parked cars. Both men moved quickly but quietly, staying in the shadows cast by the overhead lighting and using the vehicles as cover. After covering about 50 yards, just before they reached the ramp leading to the second floor, Flint grabbed the casino worker and pulled him down to one knee behind a minivan. The position gave them good concealment while allowing Flint to keep watch on their back trail. The sergeant spoke in low tones that wouldn't carry past their immediate vicinity, his voice barely audible above the distant moaning from the entrance. "First off, are you okay?" Flint asked. Daniel was clearly in a state of shock, his eyes wide and unfocused as he struggled to process what had just happened. But he did his best to shake off the mental fog, giving Flint a half-hearted nod that was more reflex than genuine assessment. "I think so," Daniel replied shakily. "But damn, man, you just killed 4 people." "They're not people, at least not anymore," Flint said matter-of-factly. The words hung in the air between them, and Flint found himself thinking about the statement before shaking his head and staring directly at Daniel. "How do you not know that?" Flint asked incredulously. "The entire casino is swarming with those things." Daniel got a confused look on his face, as if he didn't believe what the sergeant was telling him. "What are you talking about, man?" Daniel asked. "There's hundreds of them in the parking lot and by the front door," Flint explained. "They have to be swarming inside the building, too." Daniel's face went white as the implications hit him, and he immediately began to rise as if planning to rush back toward the casino. Thoughts of coworkers and friends were clearly flashing through his mind as he processed the information. Flint quickly pulled him back down before he could expose their position or make noise that would attract unwanted attention. "Where have you been the last few hours?" Flint demanded. "Sleep in my truck, man," Daniel explained, his voice taking on a defensive tone. "I pulled a double today because so many people called out, and I have to be back at 6, so I just thought I'd catch a few hours in my truck instead of driving home to Marshall." Flint let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head at the cruel irony of finding the one man who didn't know the apocalypse was happening. Daniel had literally slept through the end of the world, protected by nothing more than the steel walls of his pickup truck. "All right, listen up," Flint said seriously. "Those people are fast, and they bite. So if you see one, run, or if you can't get away, aim for the head." Daniel looked at the sergeant with complete confusion, as if he was being told the rules to some elaborate practical joke. "Are you serious right now?" Daniel asked. "Deadly," Flint replied. "Now I need your help." "Yeah, sure, man. What do you need?" Daniel asked. "I need to find a guest at the hotel," Flint explained. "How do I do that?" "We can call the front desk and get their room number," Daniel said. "But if what you said is true, I don't think anybody is going to be there to answer." "Then I'm going to have to look it up myself," Flint said. "So how do we get into the casino?" "We?" Daniel asked, his voice rising slightly. "You just said it's overrun with those people. I'm not going back in there." "Well, Daniel, do you have another car?" Flint asked pointedly. Daniel thought about it for a moment, muttering under his breath and shaking his head as he realized his predicament. His truck was completely destroyed, and walking out of the city on foot would be suicide given what was happening on the streets. "That's what I thought," Flint said. "So you're free to stay out here if you want, but I don't recommend it. Now how do we get back inside?" "Well, there's a walkway just down there that will take you to the front entrance," Daniel said, pointing toward the main level. "Gonna need another way," Flint replied immediately. "Okay, then we hike up to the next floor and take the elevator up to the 5th floor," Daniel explained. "There's a covered walkway that will take us over to the hotel tower." "That's the play," Flint agreed. "Let's move." Daniel nodded, but as he started to rise from their concealed position, his knee clanged loudly against the metal bumper of the car they were hiding behind. He let out a pained grunt as the metallic sound echoed throughout the parking deck like a dinner bell. "Move now, go, go," Flint hissed urgently. Knowing that their cover was blown, and that every zombie in the area would be converging on their location, both men emerged from the shadows and began running as hard as they could toward the ramp leading to the upper level. The excited moans of zombies coming from behind them echoed against the concrete walls, creating a chorus of hunger that terrified them. Flint glanced over his shoulder, spotting at least a dozen creatures in hot pursuit, their arms pumping as they ran. As they reached the ramp leading to the next floor, Daniel pointed ahead to a bank of elevators that were roughly 30 yards away. The metal doors reflected the overhead lighting, promising salvation if they could reach them in time. "Come on, we're almost there," Daniel called out breathlessly. Flint picked up the pace, placing his hand on Daniel's back to push him forward and encourage him to move faster. The casino employee got there first, his fingers stabbing repeatedly at the call button, as if pressing it harder would make the elevator arrive more quickly. Flint stopped just short of the elevator bank, turning to face their pursuers and drawing his handgun. He took careful aim, making sure each shot was properly lined up before squeezing the trigger. The first few zombies dropped as the others continued closing the gap, now within 20 yards and showing no signs of slowing down. The elevator dinged, and a small light above the door illuminated as the mechanism engaged. Daniel stood anxiously by the entrance, bouncing on his feet as he waited for the elevator doors to open. His eyes were fixed on the scene between the doors, willing them to part and reveal their salvation. His expression suddenly changed to one of horror as the doors slowly slid apart, revealing not an empty elevator car but a zombie that had been trapped inside. The creature's clothes were torn and blood-stained, and its vacant eyes immediately locked onto Daniel as a fresh meal. The zombie let out an excited moan as it lunged forward, its arms reaching out to grab the young man who was frozen in terror just inches away from its grasping claws. "Help me! Help me!" Will Sergeant Flint and his new companion make it to the casino in one piece? Be sure to tune into the next exciting episode of The Soldier, Day Zero, to find out.